The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the set of the Kelly Clarkson show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their murmurs filling the air as the crew adjusted cameras and checked sound levels. Kelly Clarkson stood off stage, her signature smile in place, but her eyes darted toward the green room where her next guest waited. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, was no stranger to high-profile interviews, but this booking had raised eyebrows. From the moment it was confirmed, his team had been cagey, insisting on pre-approved questions, which wasn't Kelly's style. She liked her show raw, real, a place where people could let their guard down. But Harry's people had pushed back, hard, and the tension was already simmering before the cameras even rolled. Backstage, Harry paced the green room, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. He'd done this dance before, countless times, on both sides of the Atlantic. Interviews were a tightrope. One wrong word could spark a firestorm. He'd agreed to this appearance to promote his latest charitable initiative, a mental health campaign tied to his foundation. It was supposed to be a soft pitch, a chance to show the world he was more than tabloid fodder. But the pre-interview briefing had left him uneasy. Kelly's team had sent over a list of topics, and while most were safe, a few questions veered into territory he'd rather avoid: his family, his decision to step back from royal duties, the ongoing media circus. He'd asked for those to be scrapped, but the response was vague, a polite non-commitment that set his nerves on edge. Kelly, meanwhile, wasn't thrilled either. She'd built her career on authenticity, and the idea of tiptoeing around a guest's sensitivities didn't sit right. Her audience came for real talk, not rehearsed platitudes. She'd agreed to keep things light, but she wasn't about to let Harry off the hook entirely. This was her show, her rules. As she stepped onto the set, the crowd erupted, and she waved, her energy infectious. The band kicked into gear, and the show's intro rolled, Kelly's voice booming through the speakers, welcoming everyone to another episode. She glanced at the teleprompter, then back at the audience, her mind already racing through how she'd handled the next segment. Harry watched from the wings, his jaw tight. He'd seen Kelly's interviews before, her ability to disarm guests with charm before slipping in a question that cut deep. He wasn't naive. He knew the game, but he also knew the stakes were higher for him. Every word would be dissected, every gesture analyzed. He adjusted his blazer, smoothed his hair, and took a deep breath. The stage manager gave him a nod. It was almost time. Kelly wrapped up her opening monologue, cracking a few jokes that had the audience roaring. Then, with a flourish, she turned to the camera, her voice bright but with an edge that only someone listening closely would catch. Coming up next, we've got a very special guest, someone who's been making waves across the globe. He's here to talk about his latest project, but we're going to get into a little more than that. Please welcome Prince Harry. The crowd cheered, and Harry stepped out, his smile practiced but not quite reaching his eyes. He waved, shaking Kelly's hand before settling into the guest chair. The lights felt hotter now, the audience's energy a tangible weight. Kelly leaned forward, her grin wide, but her gaze sharp, like she was sizing him up. "So, Harry," she began, her tone light but probing, "you've been out here doing your thing, living your truth, as we say. But let's start with the big question. Why this show? Why now?" The question wasn't on the approved list, and Harry's smile faltered for a split second. He recovered quickly, launching into a rehearsed answer about his charity work. But Kelly's expression didn't change. She nodded along, but her eyes told a different story. She was waiting for an opening. The audience didn't notice, caught up in the moment, but the stage manager in the wings shifted uncomfortably. This was going to be a long segment. Harry leaned back in the chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, betraying the calm he was trying to project. Kelly's opening question had thrown him, but he powered through, talking about his mental health initiative with the kind of polished earnestness that came from years of public speaking. The audience clapped at the right moments, their enthusiasm genuine. But Kelly wasn't here for a press release. She let him finish, her smile encouraging, but as soon as he paused, she tilted her head, her eyes glinting with that mix of warmth and mischief that made her so dangerous on air. "That's amazing work, Harry, truly," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "But let's get real for a second. You've been through a lot, stepping away from the royal life, moving across the pond, dealing with all the noise that comes with it. How do you keep your head on straight when the world's watching your every move?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the studio. The audience leaned in, sensing the shift. Harry's smile tightened, his fingers twitching slightly against his knee. He'd expected some push, but not this soon, not this direct. He cleared his throat, buying a moment. "Well, Kelly, it's about focusing on what matters. The work, the people we're trying to help." He pivoted back to his charity, but Kelly wasn't biting. She nodded, letting him talk, but her expression was one of polite skepticism, like she was waiting for the real answer. The crowd was still with her, hanging on her every word. But backstage, Harry's team was on edge. His publicist, a woman in a blazer, whispered something to the stage manager, who shook his head. his face grim. Kelly leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. Her posture casual but her intent anything but. Sure, but come on, Harry. It's gotta be tough. You're not just a guy doing charity work, you're Prince Harry. People have opinions. They talk, they write. How do you deal with the pressure of being, well, you? The audience laughed lightly, but there was an undercurrent of tension now, a sense that this wasn't just a chat. Harry's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he looked like he might deflect again. But then he leaned forward, meeting her gaze, his voice low and measured. It's not easy, he admitted, and the room seemed to hold its breath. He tried to block out the noise, but sometimes it gets through. You read something, hear something, and it's not just about you. It's about your family, your kids. He paused, his eyes flickering with something raw, unguarded. The audience was silent, caught off guard by the shift in his tone. Kelly nodded, her face softening, but she didn't let up. That's real, she said, her voice gentler now. But when it gets personal like that, don't you ever want to just, I don't know, clap back, set the record straight? The question hung in the air, and Harry's expression hardened. He knew what she was doing, nudging him toward the minefield of his family drama, the one topic he'd explicitly asked to avoid. His publicist was now standing, her phone in hand, gesturing urgently to the producer in the control booth. Harry took a slow breath, his mind racing. He could play it safe, stick to the script, but something in Kelly's tone, her refusal to let him coast, sparked a flicker of defiance in him. Look, Kelly, he said, his voice sharper now. I'm here to talk about the work, not to rehash old stories. You know how it goes. The media loves a fight, but I'm not here to give them one. The audience murmured, some clapping, others shifting uncomfortably. Kelly raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Fair enough, she said, but her smile had an edge, like she was just getting started. Let's talk about the work then. But you gotta admit, the personal stuff, it shapes the mission, right? People want to know the man behind the cause. She leaned back, tossing the ball back in his court, and Harry realized this wasn't going to be the easy promo he'd hoped for. The stage manager glanced at the clock. The segment was running long, and the tension was only climbing. The studio air felt thicker now, charged with the unspoken challenge in Kelly's words. Harry sat rigid, his hands gripping the arms of the chair, his eyes locked on hers. The audience, sensing the shift, held their breath, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by a quiet intensity. Kelly's question about the man behind the cause wasn't just a prompt, it was a gauntlet, daring him to peel back the polished exterior. Harry's instinct was to deflect, to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But the way Kelly leaned in, her gaze steady and unyielding, made it clear she wasn't letting him off that easily. I think the work speaks for itself, Harry said, his voice clipped but controlled. The mission is about helping people, giving them tools to cope, not about my personal story. He forced a smile, but it didn't land. The audience clapped politely, but their energy was waning, as if they could feel the conversation teetering on the edge of something bigger. Kelly tilted her head, her expression a mix of empathy and skepticism, like she was weighing whether to push harder or pull back. She chose to push. Absolutely. The work's incredible, she said, her tone warm but pointed. But people connect to stories. Harry, they see you, a guy who's lived in this crazy spotlight, talking about mental health, and they wonder, what's driving you? Is it the stuff you've been through, the family stuff, the headlines? The word family landed like a spark in dry grass. Harry's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the polished prince was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd had enough. Kelly, I get it, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. People are curious. But I'm not here to feed that curiosity. I'm here to talk about something bigger than me. The audience stirred, some nodding in support, others whispering to their neighbors. Kelly didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her hands clasped, her smile gone. I hear you, she said, her voice steady. But you're not just a spokesperson, you're a person. And people want to know how you're holding up under all this pressure. I mean, you've got a wife, kids, a life. How do you balance that with the world's expectations? The question wasn't on the approved list, and Harry's team knew it. His publicist was now in the control booth. Her face flushed as she argued with the producer, her gestures sharp and urgent. The stage manager hovered near the set, his earpiece buzzing with instructions, but Kelly wasn't looking at him. She was focused on Harry, her eyes searching his face for a crack in the armor. Harry took a deep breath, his fingers digging into the chair. Balance is tough, he said, his tone measured but strained. You prioritize what matters, your family, your work. But it's not a story I'm here to sell. I'm not here to talk about my life for clicks or headlines. The audience was quiet now, the earlier cheers replaced by a tense silence. Kelly nodded slowly, but her expression didn't soften. I respect that, she said, but her voice had an edge, like she wasn't done. But let's be honest, Harry, the headlines are part of your reality. You can't escape them. So when they get it wrong, when they twist your story, don't you ever want to just, I don't know, tell your side? The question was a direct hit, and Harry's composure slipped. His eyes flashed, and he leaned forward, his voice rising for the first time. "My side," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the studio hum. "My side gets twisted the second it leaves my mouth. You think I don't know how this works? I say one thing, and tomorrow it's a war with my brother or a crisis with my wife. I'm done playing that game." The audience gasped, a low ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. Kelly's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't back down. "So you're saying you're done talking about it altogether?" she pressed, her voice calm but relentless. "Because it sounds like there's a lot you want to say." Harry's face darkened, and the stage manager signaled for a commercial break, his hands slicing through the air. The tension was a live wire, and everyone felt it. The stage manager's signal hung in the air, but the cameras kept rolling, the red lights unblinking. Harry's words echoed in the studio, sharp and raw, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the title. The audience was frozen, their eyes darting between him and Kelly, who sat unfazed, her hands still clasped, her gaze locked on his. She hadn't expected him to snap like that, but now that he had, she wasn't about to let the moment slip away. The control booth was chaos. Harry's publicist now shouting into her phone, the producer gesturing wildly, but Kelly ignored the frenzy. She knew live TV, knew the power of a moment like this, and she wasn't cutting to commercial just yet. "Wow, Harry," she said, her voice low, almost intimate, like they were the only two in the room. "That's real, and I get it. The media can be a beast. But when you say you're done playing the game, what does that mean? Are you saying you're done talking, period, or just done with the way it's been twisted?" The question was softer than her last, but no less pointed, a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. Harry's eyes flicked to the audience, then back to her, his chest rising and falling as he fought to regain control. He knew he'd slipped, let his frustration show, and now he was cornered. "I mean, I'm done letting other people write my story," he said, his voice steadier now but still laced with edge. "I came here to talk about mental health, about helping people who feel trapped, because I know what that feels like. But every time I open my mouth, it's not about the work, it's about some drama someone else made up." He leaned back, his hands unclenching slightly, but his posture was still tense, like a spring coiled too tight. The audience murmured, some nodding, others whispering, caught between sympathy and the thrill of seeing a prince unravel. Kelly tilted, her head, her expression softening just enough to keep him talking. "That's gotta be exhausting," she said, her voice genuine but still probing. "Feeling like you can't say anything without it being turned into something else. But you're here, right? You're still showing up. Why keep doing it? It's such a fight." It was a question that sounded empathetic but was loaded. A challenge to explain himself without falling back on rehearsed lines. Harry's jaw tightened again, and for a moment it looked like he might shut down. But then he leaned forward, his voice quieter, almost confessional. "Because I have to," he said, "because if I don't, then the people who need help, the ones struggling in silence, they don't get heard either. That's why I'm here, Kelly, not to talk about my family or my past, but to do something that matters." The audience broke into applause, louder than before, a wave of support that seemed to catch him off guard. He glanced at them, his expression softening for the first time, but Kelly wasn't done. She nodded, letting the applause fade, then leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's powerful," she said, "but let's be real, Harry, the personal and the mission, they're tied together. People see you, your life, your choices, and they feel inspired, or they judge. How do you handle the judgment? The stuff about your family, your brother, your dad? That's gotta hit hard." The mention of his family again was like a match to kindling. Harry's eyes flashed, and he sat up straighter, his voice rising, sharp and unguarded. "Kelly, I told you, I'm not going there," he said, his tone slicing through the studio's hum. "You want to talk about judgment? Fine, I deal with it every day, but I'm not here to air dirty laundry or give you a headline. I'm here for the work." The audience went silent, the air heavy with shock. Kelly's smile vanished, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger but in calculation. She opened her mouth to respond, but Harry cut her off, his voice louder now. "You keep pushing, but I'm not your soundbite. I'm done with that." He stood, ripping off his mic, the feedback screeching through the speakers. The stage manager froze, and the control booth erupted as Harry stormed toward the wings, leaving Kelly staring after him. The studio was a vacuum, the silence swallowing every whisper as Harry's footsteps echoed off the stage. The mic, now dangling from the chair, hissed with static, a sharp reminder of his abrupt exit. Kelly sat motionless for a beat, her eyes fixed on the spot where he'd disappeared into the wings. The audience was stunned, their faces a mix of shock and uncertainty, some craning their necks to see if he'd return. The stage manager, pale and wide-eyed, signaled frantically to the control booth, where the producer was barking orders into a headset. Kelly's composure cracked for a split second, her lips parting as if to speak. But she caught herself, her years of live TV kicking in. She turned to the audience, her smile returning, though it was tighter now, less effortless. "Well, folks, that's what we call real talk," she said, her voice light but strained, coaxing a nervous laugh from the crowd. "Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more." The band struck up, the cameras panned to the cheering audience, and the show cut to commercial. The transition as smooth as could be managed under the circumstances. But backstage, it was pandemonium. Harry's publicist was in the producer's face, her voice a low furious hiss, demanding to know why Kelly had ignored the agreed boundaries. The producer, sweat beading on his forehead, tried to explain, but she wasn't listening, already dialing her phone, likely to alert Harry's team back in California. In the green room, Harry stood with his hands on his hips, his breathing heavy, his face a storm of frustration and regret. He hadn't planned to walk off, hadn't meant to let it escalate, but Kelly's relentless prodding had hit a nerve he couldn't ignore. He knew the optics were bad. A prince storming off a daytime talk show wasn't exactly the headline he'd wanted. His aide, a quiet man who'd been with him for years, hovered nearby, offering a bottle of water and a cautious, "You all right, sir?" Harry waved him off, pacing again, his mind replaying the moment he'd stood up, the screech of the mic, the collective gasp of the audience. He'd wanted to take control, to shut down the narrative, but now he wondered if he'd just handed the media a fresh scandal on a silver platter. Back on set, Kelly was in a huddle with her team, her voice low but firm. "We didn't do anything wrong," she said, her hands gesturing sharply. He knew this was live TV. He knew we'd ask real questions. The stage manager nodded, but his eyes were on the clock, the commercial break ticking down. The producer, still frazzled from the publicist's tirade, suggested cutting the segment entirely, but Kelly shook her head. "No way," she said. "We're not sweeping this under the rug. People saw what they saw. We address it." Her team exchanged glances, unsure if she was making the right call. But Kelly was already turning back to the set, adjusting her blazer, her jaw set. As the break ended, the band played the show back in, and Kelly took her spot. Her smile brighter now, but her eyes carried a flicker of defiance. "Welcome back, everybody," she said, her voice steady, commanding the room. "So, that was a moment, huh? Look, we try to keep it real here, and sometimes that means things get heated. Prince Harry's got a lot on his plate, and we respect his passion for his work. We're gonna keep this show moving. But I want to say, I hope he knows this is a place where people can speak their truth." The audience clapped, some hesitantly, others with enthusiasm, sensing her attempt to smooth things over without backing down. Backstage, Harry's aide was now on the phone, relaying the situation to someone higher up, his voice low and urgent. Harry caught snippets, words like damage control and press statement, and his stomach twisted. He hadn't come here for this, hadn't wanted another fire to put out. But as he glanced at a monitor showing Kelly addressing the audience, her words about speaking his truth hit him hard. For a moment, he wondered if he'd made a mistake, if he should go back out there and finish what he'd started. Harry stood frozen in the green room, the monitor's glow casting shadows across his face as Kelly's words lingered in the air. Her invitation to speak his truth felt like a challenge, a dare to return and reclaim the narrative he'd just abandoned. His aide, still on the phone, glanced at him, his expression a mix of concern and urgency, but Harry barely noticed. His mind was a tug of war, one side screaming to leave, to get out before the situation spiraled further. The other pulling him back to the stage, where he could still salvage the interview and refocus on his mission. He ran a hand through his hair, his pulse hammering as he weighed his options. The aide hung up, stepping closer. "Sir, they're drafting a statement. We can be out of here in 10 minutes. But Harry didn't respond, his eyes still on the monitor, where Kelly was now transitioning to a lighter segment, her laughter filling the studio as she introduced a cooking demo. On set, Kelly was in her element, tossing banter with the chef as they fumbled through a recipe, the audience laughing along. But her mind was still on Harry, on the moment he'd walked off, the way his voice had cracked with frustration. She'd pushed hard, maybe too hard, but she didn't regret it. Her show thrived on authenticity, and she'd given him a chance to be real. Still, as she stirred a pot of sauce, her eyes flicked to the wings, half expecting him to reappear. The producer, now calmer, leaned in during a pause, whispering that Harry's team was threatening to pull all future bookings. Kelly nodded, her face unreadable, but inside, she was steeling herself for what came next. She'd addressed the walk-off again before the show ended. She had too. Her audience deserved closure. Backstage, Harry made a decision. He turned to his aide, his voice low but firm. "I'm going back out." The aide's eyes widened, but before he could protest, Harry was moving, striding toward the stage with a purpose that hadn't been there before. The stage manager, caught off guard, scrambled to alert the control booth, his voice a harsh whisper into his headset. As the cooking segment wrapped, the audience clapping, Harry stepped into the wings, his presence sending a ripple through the crew. Kelly, mid-sentence, caught sight of him and froze, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. gesturing to the band to hold off on the next cue. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, turning to the audience, her voice carrying a new weight, "we've got a surprise. Please welcome back Prince Harry." The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and gasps, as Harry walked out, his expression resolute but less guarded than before. He took his seat, reattaching his mic with a steady hand, and met Kelly's gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice clear, cutting through the noise. "I walked off because I felt cornered, but that's not who I want to be. I came here to talk about something important, and I'd like to finish that." The audience roared, their support a wave that seemed to lift him. Kelly nodded, her smile genuine now, though her eyes still held that sharp curiosity. "I appreciate that, Harry," she said. "Let's do it. Tell us about the work, the mission, what's driving you." This time, Harry didn't hesitate. He spoke about his mental health campaign, the stories of people he'd met, the stigma he wanted to break. His words were raw, unpolished, and the audience leaned in, hanging on every syllable. Kelly listened, asking questions that guided him deeper into the cause, steering clear of the personal traps that had sparked the earlier clash. The segment stretched longer than planned, but no one cared. The energy in the room was electric, a shared sense that something real was happening. As the show neared its end, Kelly turned to the audience, her voice warm. "This is why we do this, folks, to have real conversations, even when they're messy. Harry, thank you for coming back." He nodded, a small smile breaking through, and the audience cheered again, louder this time. Backstage, his publicist exhaled, her phone finally still, while the producer grinned, knowing they'd just made TV history. Harry left the stage to applause, his head high, the weight of the moment settling into something like relief.